We're going to start critique groups so that we can help each other perfect our writing. I've never formally studied writing. I learned how to write in a secular critique group. And we were somewhat brutal on each other, which to me is not the best way to go about it, but we were a secular critique group. But I did learn a lot just from us talking about each other's writing and what we thought was strong, what we thought was weak. But before we implement that in this group, and we will talk about how we want to implement it after I teach you a little bit about the art of critiquing. A friend told me after she received her first critique from a writing group, she drove home angry. She was offended. She did not appreciate the feedback on how her manuscript could be improved. She was positive they did not know what they were talking about, and so upset she said, "I swore I'd never return." But she cooled off, swallowed her pride, returned to the group, and remained for years. Her manuscript was eventually published by a traditional publisher. On the acknowledgement page, I know because I have a copy of the book, I was one of those people who offended her. On the acknowledgement page, she thanked everyone in the group she was angry with after her first critique. She thanked them for the bits and pieces of suggestions that ended up on the pages of her book. Her book won a Crystal Kite Award from the Society of Children's Writers and Illustrators. If uncomfortable feedback dissuades you from seeking help with your writing, you might miss the prize of an award-winning novel. Proverbs 23:7 says, "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." Also applicable to women. As a woman thinks in her heart, so is she. The words we write begin where? Thoughts in our heart. They're a part of us. Our writing reflects who we are. When someone says something negative about our writing, it's easy to perceive the comment as a personal attack. And what do you do when you feel attacked? You go into defense mode. The reaction is to defend yourself. And sometimes people get hurt when that happens. That is why an essential element to a critique group being successful is writers who are not easily offended, and when they are offended, they're quick to forgive. And that should be easy as us for Christians, because we are taught to forgive. But there is an art to critiquing that goes beyond sharing a subjective opinion that is influenced by personal feelings about writing and our preferences in reading. None of the critique groups I have attended offered instruction on how to give a critique. We were thrown into the deep end of the pool to sink or swim. I believe we can avoid some problems if we simply take the time to first study how to evaluate a writer's work. Specific to our group, we have a goal that transcends human reasonings for writing. Not that the human reasons are wrong. It's just that we are Christians. The tagline for Southern Christian writers is writing to honor God. That goal defines how we should critique each other's work. We honor God when we encourage each other, not when we tear each other down. We honor God when we encourage each other to pursue God's desire and purpose for their writing. I write today because of one word: encouragement. Because I never had a passion for writing. I had been teaching for 5 years and I loved it, and I didn't want to stop. When I was left with nothing but writing, every little bump in the road was a reason to quit. A few years ago, I was one of 3 people asked to speak about writing during the opening introduction at a writers' conference. We had 10 minutes apiece to talk about an experience in writing. So I told them how I was a reluctant writer who resisted writing for many years, and every bump in the road a reason to stop. And then when I learned I would have to hire someone to edit my manuscript and discovered how expensive that is, I said, well, this is the end of the road. I threw that manuscript in the closet and said, I'm done. I'm not going to spend that kind of money to edit something that may never get published, or if it does get published, may never sell a copy. I'm just not going to waste my husband's money. I was done, but God wasn't. Months later, I'm sitting in a church with a friend. She handed me an offering envelope with money in it. And I'm wondering, why are you giving this to me? Just put it in the basket. I said, well, do you want me to put this in the offering basket when it comes by? And she said, no, it's for you. And I looked at that envelope with the church name on it, and I pointed at it and said, this isn't for me. You see the name right here on the envelope? And I threw it in her lap. I said, you put that in the offering basket when it goes by. She picked it up and extended it towards me. She said, no, it's for your ministry. I thought she'd lost her mind. At the time, I wasn't doing anything in ministry. The door had shut on teaching, and that door was not opening again, and it was pretty clear it may never open again. And she had at that time been a student in my class, but we had both left that church. And then more than a year later, I ran into her. We were both attending the same church again. So I looked at her and told her, my ministry, I don't have a ministry. You put that money in the offering basket. And she said, no, it's for your writing ministry. I had not seen her or talked to her for more than a year until our paths had crossed again in that new church. Nobody knew I had written a manuscript. I don't even think I told my husband I was writing a manuscript. I was writing the manuscript because I was in a depression that I couldn't teach anymore, and I had to do something or lose my mind. She did not know I had quit writing. She did not know I needed money to continue, and that I had refused to continue because I didn't have the money. Only God could have put it in her heart to give me money for my writing ministry, which I didn't even know I had. You know what her obedience did? Her obedience to God encouraged me to keep writing and suggested that writing might be my calling. I took the money after she took it out of the church's offering envelope and handed me the cash. I wasn't about to take it in the church's offering envelope. And she continued from week to week to give me small offerings, and so I started matching what she gave me, and eventually we had enough. The manuscript was edited and published. So I returned to my table after telling that story to everybody at the conference. A lady at the table told me the story had encouraged her. And throughout the morning, a few more people stopped to tell me they had appreciated the story and encouraged them. But there was one person at the conference who was not encouraged by what I said. At lunch, we went to the main conference room for the keynote speaker's address. During the presentation, she took a side road to dismiss the experience that encouraged me to keep writing. She said, writing's not a ministry. You either write or you don't. Well, that was discouraging, coming from a well-known famous author, and a little humiliating in front of, the conference and someone of her stature announcing that I was wrong. And I thought, well, maybe I am. She's a successful writer selling thousands of books. I've never sold thousands of books. Maybe writing is not something God calls you to do as a ministry, which gave me an excuse to quit writing again. She sat down, and a literary agent spoke next. His family had been in Christian publishing for generations, and at one time they owned the largest Christian publishing house in the world. He was in the audience when I spoke. He was also in the audience when she dismissed the idea that writing could be a ministry. He didn't agree with her comment and made it clear in his presentation that writing is a ministry and people are called to write. So who should I believe? One author who discouraged and humiliated me before the entire conference, or a literary agent whose family had been in Christian publishing for generations? To me, two confirmations that this is what God wants me to do trumped one person's opinion that it isn't. Who should you listen to? The people who discourage you and tear you down, or the people who encourage you and build you up? Clearly, her experience in writing was different than mine, but that did not mean one of us was right and one of us was wrong. It just meant that God's plan for our lives is different, and some people who are struggling need stronger affirmation and encouragement than others. It wasn't that I was anything special above God, above any of his other children. It's just that I wasn't there. I was having a hard time accepting it, didn't want to do it, so he gave me a little extra to push me down the road. I believe writing can be a calling and a ministry, but I do not believe it has to be. If you're a Christian with a love and a passion for writing, you should write regardless of your reason. Our gifts and abilities come from God, so honor him with what he gave you. Right? Because there is power in words. Jesus is identified as the Word. The Apostle John opened his gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Words are so powerful, it produced an idea that became a phrase most people are familiar with and would agree with. The pen is mightier than the sword. That saying was made famous by Edward Buller Lytton in Act 2 of Lytton's 1839 play Richelieu. Cardinal Richelieu discovers his friend and confidant was plotting against him. As a priest, he could not challenge that friend to a fistfight. So his servant suggested there are other weapons he could use, and he replied, "True that, beneath the rule of men entirely great, the pen is mightier than the sword." How many of you have ever heard the first phrase of that sentence? We just hear the last, right? But there was more to the idea. Lytton's play made the latter phrase of that sentence popular, but he was not the first to put the idea in writing. He didn't form the idea. The idea had been around for a long time. Thomas Jefferson sent a letter to Thomas Paine in 1796 in which he wrote, "Go on doing with your pen what in other times was done with the sword." Before Jefferson, Robert Burton in The Anatomy of Melancholy, published in 1621, wrote, "A blow with a word strikes deeper than a blow with a sword." In Burton's day, that idea was already an old saying. A similar phrase appears in George Whetstone's Civil Discourses, published in 1582. "The dash of a pen is more grievous than the counter use of a lance." This idea existed 1,500 years before Whetstone wrote it in Civil Discourses. Does anyone know who may have wrote it before they did, where that idea probably originated? The Bible. Hebrews 4:12. "For the word of God is living and powerful and sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing even to the division of soul and spirit and of joints and marrow, and is a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart." Writing does not trump the power of a sword unless we are entirely great, like God is. No one is God's equal in the great department, but God can inspire us to write his ideas that are sharper than a two-edged sword. In fact, we can become great. Does anybody know how? Well, yes, but I'm going to go with King David in Psalms 18:35. David said to God, "Thy gentleness has made me great." There is a reason God puts great value on a gentle and quiet spirit. There is a reason the Bible challenges us to be completely humble and gentle. Gentleness nourishes greatness. If we treat one another gently, like God treats us, we can encourage each other down the path to great writing that has the power to knock down strongholds of human reasonings that are contrary to the truth. Great writing that has the power to destroy false arguments made about God. Great writing with the power to abolish proud thoughts that blind people from knowing God. The art of critiquing can be defined in one word: gentleness. And when we begin to move into the critiquing of each other's words, the critiquing of each other's writings, we will practice gentleness. The way we feel about a person's writing is not an accurate measure of good writing. Writing defined as good in the 1800s, even the early 1900s, with its long narration, and run-on sentences that look like paragraphs, might have flunked the English classes I took in school in the late 60s and 70s. Lytton, who wrote "The pen is mightier than the sword," was a popular novelist in his day. He also gave us "It was a dark and stormy night," a familiar opening sentence used by Snoopy in the Peanuts comic strip. The reason that was in there, why they had Snoopy writing that, because today that is considered the worst opening sentence to ever be in a novel. There's even a contest sponsored by a university in San Jose to see who can write as bad an opening sentence as Lytton did. Well, it wasn't a terrible opening sentence to a novel in his generation. He made a living writing. Few people make a living writing, trust me. But today it is. So let me ask you, who makes these decisions? And what authority do they have to do to change what's considered good writing and what's considered bad writing? The rules that govern good and bad writing change with the seasons. At one time, it was forbidden to start a sentence with a conjunction, and or but. Within my lifetime, that has changed, and I'll prove it to you. This is the Advocate, front page story, opening sentence to a paragraph. But the reality is that Edwards win. Starts with a conjunction. And that wasn't a misprint where they should have a comma, because open to the next page, another paragraph, opening sentence, and the International Committee of the Red Cross. It's acceptable today to do it. But when I was in school, I get marks off if I did it. And it's not really the first time that rule has changed. Every sentence in the first chapter of the King James Bible begins with the conjunction "and," except for one sentence that begins with "so." This is the King James Bible. Who makes up these rules and who changes them? I had a conversation with a writing friend about adverbs that end in ly, gladly, sadly, happily, thankfully. Her position, using ly words is just bad writing. You must not say he hurriedly walked to his destination, just say he ran to his destination. The book that was selling millions of copies at the time were the Harry Potter books. So I read the first chapter in the Harry Potter book to see if she used adverbs that ended in ly, and I counted 15 in the first chapter. J.K. Rowling is one of the richest authors in the world, and here's someone telling me that her writing is bad? I recently listened to 24 lectures on the subject of the sentence. Who knew you could have that many lectures on the sentence? By Dr. Brooks Landon, the director of the University of Iowa's General Education Literature Program. The university was the original developer of the Master of Fine Arts degree, and it operates the world-renowned Iowa Writers Workshop, which has produced 17 of the university's 46 Pulitzer Prize winners. Dr. Landon concluded the lectures on the sentence with a discussion about assembling sentences into a paragraph, and I found what he had to say fascinating. The definition of a paragraph that is generally treated as a mandate from God and has been taught for a century and was taught to me came to us from English Composition and Rhetoric, written in 1866 by Alexander Bain. Bain defined the paragraph as the division of discourse next higher than the sentence and is a collection of sentences with unity of purpose. Bain gave us 6 principles that govern the structure of a paragraph. By the 1970s, the 6 principles were reduced to 3. And those 3 were unity, coherence, and emphasis. In other words, a paragraph is a topic sentence and all the following sentences should be on the topic, and that makes sense to me. But according to Professor Landon, and now this is a quote, Landon said, Bain got it wrong. His errors have been mechanically, if not mindlessly, passed down as the received truths of paragraph theory. He went on to say there's nothing wrong with doing it Bain's way except, and this is another quote, what he said word for word, it, meaning your paragraph, will be an artificial structure that forces your writing style into a box made long ago by one self-trained rhetorician at the University of Aberdeen, Scotland. And if you go looking for examples that will fit this prescriptive model, you are most certain to find them, since this model has been forced on writing students for nearly 150 years. But the odds are you won't find paragraphs by celebrated or even your favorite writers that fit this mold. Talking about today. Ouch. This is taught in a university that has produced 46 Pulitzer Prize winners. Clearly, the way to construct paragraphs have shifted out of the box. Why is Bain wrong? Why wasn't he wrong when he originally defined the paragraph 150 years ago? And what makes Professor Landon right and Bain wrong? Right? Adhering to a set of rules that define good writing does not produce great literature. Great ideas produce great literature. Ideas that capture the imagination, ideas that meet the needs of the reader, ideas that transform nations define great writing. Because writing is subjective and rules of good writing tend to fluctuate, when we offer a critique, it is our goal to gently offer suggestions and observations that will help the writer communicate so their ideas are clear, easy to read, easy to understand. It is not our goal to destroy creativity by debating rules. The communication of an idea is more important than arguing about whether you can start a sentence with a conjunction, or if you can use an ly word to describe action, or if your paragraph is properly constructed. So the art of the critique is gentleness. The thing about laws, rules, they tend to confine you. They tend to inhibit creativity. There is a reason that God is moving towards a time when he's going to do away with the law. We're under grace now, but according to Revelations, that hasn't, the law, which really only applies to the nation of Israel, because they're the ones that agreed to live by the law. Well, one day he's going to take that burden off their back. Okay, when giving a critique, you should begin with a summary of what you got from the work. State what you thought the story was about and what the author was trying to accomplish with it. This lets the author know how well he or she was able to communicate the story's key themes to you. And that's really the most important thing, that you're communicating, that you can be understood. Address your critique to the manuscript, not to the writer. Comments within the critique should be made in the nature of either "this section needs," or "I didn't understand this sentence," or "this paragraph confused me." Don't tell the writer you need to. It is their decision, not ours. They decide what needs to be changed based on the group's collective feedback. Start with the positive. Point out the author's strengths with a specific example, such as, "I like the details about your characters. You made them come alive." If it's nonfiction, you might want to point out something you learned that you didn't know or didn't see in that perspective before, and how it changed your way of thinking. After you have encouraged the author, then point to something that needs work. Starting with positive feedback sets a helpful tone to a critique and makes it easier to accept something you say that might be negative. Then go ahead and point to something that might need work, but don't overload the author with negative feedback. If there is a lot that needs work, Start with one thing and don't move on until the author has mastered that one thing. Let them progress slowly, mastering one thing at a time so they don't feel overloaded and discouraged. If you point to something that needs work, you also need to tell them why and offer a solution. If someone has a problem using quotes in dialogue, recommend a book on punctuation that helped you, or bring an address to a website or a blog that deals with that topic. We don't want to just tell them this is wrong and not give them an idea on how they can fix it. Right? Yep. Finally, do not judge a person's theology. We have people from various denominations with various beliefs. We all agree that Jesus is Lord, but then there are some things that we may not agree on. But that doesn't justify treating them with a lack of respect. We're really not here to do a Bible study. Therefore, we do not correct each other's theology. If it is theology that you find disagreeable, you are not obligated to read it, you are not obligated to offer a critique, and you are not obligated to explain why. You can just say, I don't have a critique on that. And that's all we need to know. Now, guidelines for receiving a critique. I'm sorry, I got that backwards. Guidelines for submitting a critique. When you submit something to be critiqued, be specific. You might not want the whole thing critiqued. You might be looking for something in particular. There are really 3 types of edits that a manuscript goes through before it's published. There is the contextual edit that looks at the big picture. Do I have a beginning, middle, and a satisfying ending? Is the pace too slow? Is the pace too fast? Did the author leave out important information that I needed to know to understand what came next? Or did they include a bunch of irrelevant information that got me sidetracked and I lost interest in reading it? Then it goes to a grammar or copy edit. There are different names for all these levels. That narrows the focus to the structure of your sentences, punctuation, proper word usage. Did they write H-E-R-E and when they should have said H-E-A-R? Those kinds of things. And it checks the accuracy of references, etc. The final edit that a book goes through is proofreading, and basically that catches everything missed in the previous edits. But you really need to get the big picture fixed first before you start correcting all the grammar, because then you might delete 2 or 3 paragraphs that you wasted your time fixing the grammar on. So get the big picture down first. Second, respect the person giving the critique. That person took time to read your work and form suggestions that might help you communicate your ideas and refine what you wrote. They do not deserve to be interrupted or corrected. Whether you agree with the things they say or not, you asked for an opinion. They might not be right, but they took the time to do something for free that you could be paying a lot of money for. A professional edit on 50,000 words, which is about a 200-page book, can run as high as $5,000. Wow. A professional edit. And you get what you pay for. 3, be slow to change what you wrote. If you rewrite something based on one opinion, I guarantee you'll find someone with a different opinion and you will be constantly rewriting and it will make you crazy. You will never satisfy everybody, so you satisfy what's in your heart to write. Just listen quietly to each person, and if 2 or more say the same thing, then you might need to take a look at that and decide if it needs to be changed.